Let me just throw this question out there.
Okay.
What are some of the lessons that you teach your son about growing up black in America? And more specifically, are there key points that you drive home about representation and about, simply walking down the street?
There's a story. Bill Russell tells a story about his first meeting with Nelson Mandela. And he asked Nelson Mandela a question. He said, how did you, come out of prison and help solidify South Africa? And Nelson Mandela's answer was, it's because I'm a Mandela. And he said, because of the principles that I was raised with, and that my oppressors were not my role models. And what I share with my sons and my daughter is that you are a Lynch, and we come from a long line of proud black people. As he's a Damon Lynch, I'm a Damon Lynch. My father's a Damon Lynch. My grandfather was a Damon Lynch. And you have a name that you have to uphold and represent. What we have to share with our young black children, sadly, years ago we had to share with them what to do when stopped by the police. And then we had to share with them how you have to present yourself living in America. And so we have to give those messages. But my main message to my son has always been, you are a Damon Lynch, and that means something. Everywhere you go, you have to represent the family name.
Do you have something to add to that?
Nothing to add. There is the truth in his statement, and where I'm sad is I had a father who installed a family name. So I think my generation, a lot of us are missing that legacy. That we're missing the role models, the positive role models that we can actually see and touch and listen to and ask questions of. There are too many role models who we can't see, we can't reach. If we send a letter, they won't respond. So I was lucky enough to have that and be a Lynch.
Mm-hmm. Archie, what kind of things do you kind of try to instill in your son, knowing the situation, knowing the circumstances?
Well, I have 4 sons and 1 daughter. One of the things that I've always spoken to each one of them is that, they need to always be aware of their surroundings and what's going on around them. And one of the things that my father and my grandfather always instilled in me is that there's a necessary need to be a person that's more revolutionary, injecting yourself into what's going on with your community, and not really standing by and just accepting what's the status quo, and that you need to be a part of the change, whatever the change is. All too often, I think sometimes we come to a place where we're not really injecting ourselves in what's happening in our communities, but then when something happens, then we're more reactive than proactive. And so with all of my children, they have, for the most part, they've been proactive. I've served as president of the NAACP. I'm currently a council person in the city, pastor a church, and so they take on leadership roles wherever they go, whether they're in college, whether they're in high school. They participate in what's going on. And so I think in that they've decided that they're going to be a part of the solution and not part of the problem. And as a father, I'm glad that they've taken on that role, but I think that comes from over the years, my grandfather, my father, instilling that in me, and so now my young people have taken on the same role, and I think it's a good place to start for them.
I know growing up, my parents are immigrants, and when I was growing up, particularly when I was in kindergarten and young, I didn't really understand what they were trying to tell me. Kareem, make sure when you go to school that not only do you represent your family, but you represent your family name, and you represent, the Egyptian heritage and Middle Eastern culture, and so on and so. I didn't really understand that until I got older. From my question for you, Steve, is from a business perspective. When you try to teach your son about certain things going into the business world, if you can kind of elaborate, being black going into the business world, that may some of the challenges or maybe some of the lessons that are very important for those kind of circumstances.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that as it relates to role models in the African American community, and more so 15, 20 years back and beyond, You don't walk down the streets of Cincinnati and look from one side of the road to the other side of the road and see buildings owned by African Americans. We're the only community in the United States that don't have those types of role models where the Jewish community, the Indian community, you see them in businesses, the Oriental community, you see them in businesses, but you don't see the black community in large high-rise buildings doing commercial business. And so it's very difficult until you know what's possible and know what's attainable for you. I mean, you're always somewhat regulated to a certain type of business or a certain type of job, but you don't see us being presidents like we finally got. You know, you don't see us owning a mall right downtown Cincinnati, and having that thought and that vision that this is possible because I see my father do it. All right. But then going back and saying to them that it's not automatic. You really do have to work for it. And if you're not going to get it just because your name is Stephen II, or now we have Stephen III, you're going to get it because you're going to put in the work that it takes in order to have it. And if you put in the work to do it, you can also have this. So many times you see me dressed in a suit, people think that, well, you must be a preacher. No, I'm a businessman. And when you see white businessmen go down the street with a suit and a tie, you don't say they're dressed like preachers. You say they look like a business person. So, you know, giving them that example and being able to let them have that self-esteem of they can be equal to or as like anybody else, because I'm not going to tell you that's possible. I'm going to show you it's possible, and then I'm going to show you how you get there, is what we try to instill, not just in my own kids, but in our communities, anytime I have that opportunity.
Kind of dovetailing on that is, again, teaching lessons from my parents is kind of when I started going into college, hey, Kareem, you need to work 10 times harder than the guy next to you, because maybe it was a ploy to get me to work hard, but also they kind of looked at this uphill challenge that you have to go uphill to achieve, because things are harder for you because you're not in the majority. You're not part of the kind of the standard. So from the receiving end, Stephen, how does that kind of play into where you go, how you kind of walk through life each and every day?
I walk through life because of the example that my father and my grandfather has set, that you walk with respect for yourself and others, with dignity and pride. And those things cannot be taken away from you. And if you have pride in what you do, you're going to work hard anyway, and those rewards will come eventually. You know, I've seen or heard that my grandfather's stories when he was working at the steel plant and starting his own business, would go to the steel plant and endure racism, where someone actually physically kicked him in the butt because of his race. And my father being told that he wasn't worthy to be a salesperson, taking that opportunity to grow it into a $300 million business. So for myself, what I tell my son, the days where I was working in South Carolina to elect the first black president, having guns pulled on me by police for riding down a dirt road with a fellow white organizer. Those are the stories that, even though those things are happening to you, if you walk with respect and dignity, no judge or jury can take those things away from you.
Anything to add to kind of this first kind of round, please?
Well, born in the generation I've been in, I've actually been blessed to see so many different leaders. There's a lot of things that people my age really don't see right now. We have a certain pride. You got to think that anything's possible now. We've seen it. It's happened. So in my eyes, I believe that I can do anything, because if you don't believe in yourself, then you have lost twice in life. You know what I'm saying? Other people are gonna, you know what I'm saying, put you down, but you have to have that belief in yourself, you know what I'm saying, that I can do it, or I can keep pushing forward. There's so many disadvantages you have as being a minority, or, you know what I'm saying,
this kind of race. You can be seen a certain way. You can be rejected a certain way just by a shirt you have on, seen by Trayvon Martin. So there's a lot of things that happen in life that you just gonna have to look forward past it, just keep moving forward. And that's the one thing I just want my generation to know.
Do you feel as sometimes not so much now, but definitely when I was first in college and graduating from college and getting into the workforce, do you feel like, at least sometimes I feel that the playing field isn't level. That's what I always thought. And perhaps maybe now it's a little different for me. But I felt like Kareem, the guy next to you is putting in 100%, you got to put in 110% to meet his level. Do you feel anything like that, or do you,
coming off of that, my dad actually taught me that. He says when you go into any business or any place, you want to project yourself to the best of your abilities. You want to smile, you want to, show integrity, respect, responsibility. You want to project yourself that way because there's so many things that are already pushing down on you. So you have to put 10% more than someone else. I try to do my best at everything so then I can give that image. Because if you don't, someone else is going to give you another one. Is
that the reality, gentlemen? That yes, black in America or a minority like me, you have to work 10% harder. Is that 10%, 20%, 100%? 200%. Okay. All right.
And it is really true. Most African Americans, whether it's in business, whether it's building a church, whatever it is, the hurdles are so much higher when it comes to having access to the banking and the banking relationships that it takes in order to execute. You've got the financial institutions and you've got the insurance companies that's inherently systemic roadblocks in progress of the African American community. And you can't get financing without the bank, and you can't keep a business without the insurance. So, if you can't get either, many times you can't take that next step. So, there needs to be a thought of mind on how we are able not only to create our own wealth, but to create our own institutions of wealth, such that we can now be able to give back and be the lenders of our community. It's very similar to the model of the Jewish community, very similar to the model of the Asian community and other immigrant communities that's in the United States. We need to figure out how we're able to do for ourselves, because even though you'd like to think that racism is no longer there just because we elected an African-American president, the Trayvon Martins, as I told my kids when they were coming up, and many of them, they went to Catholic schools. So in their high school years, they weren't exposed to African Americans because they were the only ones in the school. But there was a reality that I had to teach them that was going to one day be presented to them. So I made sure that even though he went to Ohio State, that he did Bethune-Cookman College, such that he had that experience and understood the experience of African American, that experience. And so, what we have to do for ourselves, nobody else can do for us. But the challenge is not 10%, it's not 20%, it's 200% plus.
Let me add to that. I think the reality of it is, and I think Reverend Lynch touched on it earlier, the legacy that our forefathers have put before us is that the expectancy is to be the very best you can, and that there's really no real percentage to put on it, as opposed to the fact that there's an expectancy in this family, and the drive should be there just because of your life experience. When you go in and you say to your son or daughter that this is the expectancy of our family. Unfortunately for us, in many of our communities, there are absent mothers, there are absent fathers. And so therefore, there's a community backbone that must pick them up. And even in that, there's unfortunately that we don't have those pillars that were, when I was coming along, that were able to discipline us, because the times have changed. And so we've given back a part of our community that was in place at one point, and so now you have some people that are missing, you know, those things that helped us through. Where when I was coming along, there was a corner store, where there was a community. Every community had their own corner store, and those people who owned the corner store had just as much influence as the funeral director and as the pastor. So therefore, when you came in for penny candy, you still got a word of wisdom from somebody in nowadays wouldn't have the same value. So I think we've lost a lot, but there's still a lot there. When you talk about the black church, there's still a lot of spiritual wisdom, still a lot of people that are in place to make sure that our young people are in place and that they're doing the right thing. Unfortunately for us, when I was coming along, in the churches, there were scholarship funds and people who, even when there weren't scholarship funds, there were people in the church who would help finance those people that didn't have the funds. So we've lost a lot in our community as far as the church and community stores. And so now it's up to us as individuals to say to our children, as Reverend Lynch has said, to keep going, and this young man has said as well, his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, they have always, all the way down the line, have said to them, this is the way we carry ourselves. And so it's unfortunate that, and I want to say this and be very clear, that I'm not sure about what happened in Florida, because his father, obviously, from what I've seen, is the same kind of father that I am. Unfortunately for him, he had to pay a price with his life. And here's another person that's saying, standing his own ground, when he was told the same thing, to stay in his car, let us handle it. Unfortunately for us, we don't have that same opportunity to approach someone who of the opposite color and be able to stand our own ground. And I have to be very clear that I don't believe that the results would have been the same had this been a black man killing a young white guy. I'm sorry, but I don't believe that. And I think we raise all of our children to the best of our ability to respect the law and to respect and believe that the law will play out. Unfortunately, it does not always work out. And so that puts us in a place again in our communities. How then can we trust our government? And I think that's pretty much all I have to say about that. How do we trust our government when these things happen? We can instill value in our children, but when the system doesn't protect them, then you got to wonder what kind of, this is the greatest country in the world, but there's still some flaws, and we need to address them.
Archie, one thing that you kind of touched on a little bit, you were kind of talking about some of the disconnects that there are between different groups in America. You know, the Asian, white, you know, the white group, immigrants, and so on. What are some of the disconnects that those other groups may not understand about growing up black in America? And that's open to anyone if you want to start.
Let me touch on that real quick.
Yeah.
I think the biggest issue in this country is diversity. Understanding the differences of our communities, whether they're Hispanic, whether they're African American, whether they're white, and even in that, you know, you could be white and living in a different. You could be white in Appalachia, and somebody not understand your background. You could be from Kentucky, from the foothills of West Virginia, and be misunderstood. So you understand that it's more of an economic disparity, I think, in this country than it is color. Because even in our community, you will find that there are African Americans who treat African Americans differently. And so we got to find a way in terms of diversity, understanding each other's mindset and their background, because there's an old story in the black churches, you know, as a preacher, we always say, you don't know my story. And so that's the case, I think, worldwide, is people just don't know the other person's story, and because of the lack of respect of their story is where the issues come in.
Stephen?
It's important as we raise our children and teach our children, it's important to let become comfortable with people of other races and exposed to people of other cultures, so that when they grow up, they're not afraid of that. They can, because at the end of the day, if we really believe what we say, people are people. And if you grow, I went to a Catholic school. I've broken bread with people of the Jewish faith. I've, lived in Dominican Republic. So at the end of the day, where I go, I can operate and be successful because I know that there's not a difference. So and they have the same values and struggles as
you kind of personally shrunk, you're shrinking that gap between the different kind of groups. So kind of going back to the original question about disconnects.
Yeah, absolutely. There are disconnects, but the only way to break those is that, going to someone's house, one of my closest friends, an Italian family, I eat dinner with them. I walk in their house, without knocking on the door and have dinner, spaghetti dinner. And I was at their house when the Trayvon Martin verdict was released. And it was just, we had that understanding. There wasn't that division, but we could understand each other, where we're coming from, because of that intentional exposure and that intentional crossing those lines and breaking those barriers. And that's the only way this thing's going to change.
I think the disconnects come from, and I'm going to talk real fast because there's a lot here to say on this, is that as an African American born and raised in America, I have what I call a dual stream of consciousness. I have a Eurocentric stream because I am born and raised in America. I attended public schools. I can be just as Eurocentric as any Eurocentric person in this country. As an African American, though, I also have an Afrocentric stream of consciousness, which means I'm born and raised in a black family. I live the black experience. I go to a black church. Most white Americans are purely Eurocentric, and you can be purely Eurocentric in America and do just fine. It's a Eurocentric country. The problem comes is that when both groups are looking at the same thing at the same time. So when the OJ verdict happens, white America and black America are looking at the same thing at the same time, and guess what happens? There's this divide. When Rodney King gets beat down and we're all looking at it, black and white and any other ethnic group, same picture, same time, white America says, well, why didn't he just lay down? And black America says, well, why did they keep beating him? So when Timothy Thomas gets shot in Cincinnati, Ohio, running from the police, Cincinnati, it divides. White Cincinnati says, well, why did he run? Black Cincinnati says, but why did they shoot him? Now, the difference is I can see what white people see because I have to be Eurocentric in this country. So I can see that, yes, OJ probably was guilty. I can see why didn't he just lay down. I can see why did he run. But they can't see what I see. Now, in the Bible, there's the first 3 books of the New Testament are called synoptic gospels, which means that these 3 writers saw the same thing, but they also saw it with the same lenses. It's not enough to see the same thing, but they saw it with the same lenses. And until different cultures can have synoptic vision, not just seeing the same thing, but seeing it the same through the same lenses, until I can see it through your eyes and you can see it through my eyes, there will always be this cultural divide. The other beautiful thing, though, about being black in America is that our sojourn can be chronicled by the numbers. It's a beautiful thing. It's chronicled by the numbers. And so what I think white America needs to understand, our journey here for 394 years has not been a walk in the park. Black people have been in America now 394 years. The first 244 years, we were fighting to be free. The next 100 years, we were fighting legal apartheid. So our first 344 years here were nothing but constant struggle. And that's totally different than any other group that came here. No matter what ship they came on, it was different than the slave ships we came on. So for the first 344 years, nothing but struggle. The next 60 years, or the next 58 years, the next years that lead us up to this 400-year period, and that's something I talk about prophetically, because in 2019, black people will have been here for 400 years, 1619 to 2019, and I'm believing prophetically that there's going to be a change when that time comes. But you can look at the numbers. You can look at the numbers from 1960, when there were more black fathers in the house, and it dramatically changes from that point. You can look at the numbers from 1980, when there were only 200,000 people in American prisons, to now when there are over 2 million, and 50% of them are African Americans. The beauty is look at the numbers, figure out what changed, and how do we fix it. And that, I think that's, to me, an exciting thing, because we can turn it around.
You mentioned something, they can't see what I see.
Right.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were discussing the white group and white
Yes.
people. I have a theory about why, but why do you think they can't see what you see?
Because they have not been immersed in my culture. They have not had to be immersed in my culture as we've had to be immersed in their culture. Because there's just not a need for them to be immersed in our culture. You know, I grew up in a community here called North Avondale, black Jewish community. All my friends were, you know, white or black or Jewish, and I just got immersed in that. I had to assimilate more to their culture than they would ever have to assimilate to mine. And so I have good white friends who still ask me questions like, Damon, why do you guys do that? Because they feel comfortable, they can ask me that. I really don't have any. Only question I've ever had of them is, why do you guys drive 3 in the front seat? You know, you see white guys and they just all get in the front seat. I'm like, why didn't somebody get in the back seat? You know, I never understood that one, but that was about the only question I've ever had of their culture.
You mentioned something about essentially 350 years of struggle.
Yes.
They don't understand the struggle in terms of, like, what I mean is that white people haven't had to go through the struggle.
Different struggles. Everybody has struggles, different struggles. And so oftentimes what is said to us is, get over it.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you keep talking about that? Not understanding, we're not talking about something that happened, lasted 2 years, 3 years. 350 years of constant struggle, constant second-class citizenship. It started with 244 being in chains, the next 90 to 100 being legal apartheid, what we call Jim Crow segregation, and then understand, so now we're only 40 or 50 years from that point.
About 2 generations.
2 generations from that point, and you expect us to be on top of the mountain? Mm-hmm. Joseph Lowery said this, and this is to black people, we got halfway up the mountain, somebody told us we were at the top, and we believed it. And we stopped the struggle. The struggle has to continue for this generation, the generations behind us, Stephen III. There has to continue to be a struggle, and one day we will get to the top. Final thing I'll say is this. Next month we celebrate the I Have a Dream speech, the March on Washington. I exegeted that speech a few weeks ago in a sermon. Exegete means that I pulled out of it the salient points. Our children will never be safe as long as they are not judged by the content of their character, but still judged by the color of their skin. That speech is so powerful because it's still unfulfilled. Trayvon Martin, any other young black person, they're still judged by the color of their skin and not the content of their character. America still has not arisen and lived up to the true meaning of its creed. We hold all these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When those things become real, when that dream becomes realized, then we won't have to have these conversations with our children.
Anything you guys want to add to that, Steve? Or
Well, when we get down to what those jurors actually saw, that would allow them to say that, you know, it's not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. It is the lens in which they view. And you, in my mind, and in most people in my community, cannot have fathomed how I can go and be the perpetrator, start the incident. I might get my butt kicked in the process, but I can shoot you and kill you, and the police give me the gun back and tell me to go home and you did a good job.
mm-hmm.
I can't fathom that, because at the end of the day, with all the facts, with all the unknowns, with everything that you do know, that happened.
And then that's kind of a representation on the kind of evolutionary sum of each culture.
Absolutely.
Of the lands, and going back to what you were saying, sir, about.
Because their reality was that I would have been scared too
Right.
of a black man walking with a hoodie.
Now,
And he was protecting me.
so that's kind of a good segue into kind of our third point about when you're faced with a situation that you can't help but think that is that person acting that way because of, in my case, my name, or because of the color of my skin. I get it. You can't help but think it. You don't want to think that way, particularly when you're a young man. You don't want to think that way. It's 2013. Maybe you don't want to think that way. So how do you react and process a situation like that? And this is frankly a question for the young guys about how do you kind of manage all of that, and no one's really said anything explicitly to you like, oh, you can't come in here because of so and so and so and so, but you just get this feeling.
He said the numbers. So now we're in a period of there's no legal segregation. It's not legal to segregate. It's not legal to be racist or however that is. It's taboo, but it's still underlying. So in Cincinnati, I'm 29 years old, so I go out drinking, I go out with friends. There are places as African-American men, mostly, that I can't go unless I'm dressed properly. And that's disturbing, because just by dressed properly, that would be up to whoever they are at the door at the time. So I would go, and they would say, "Oh no, you can't come in. Your jeans are too tight." So I'll turn around. There's a long line behind me of Caucasian men, tight jeans, tattered jeans, but they go right in. There's a quota in Cincinnati. There's a quota on how many African Americans you can let in your establishment, in your bar. So I deal with that constantly. So when I pick up the phone and say, "Hey guys, let's go have a drink," they say, "Oh, where you want to go? Let's go here." They're like, "Okay, well, make sure you have on your collared shirt and make sure you have on your khakis, because they're not going to let us in the jeans that we're wearing today."
I don't mean to interrupt you, but that is a legitimate conversation that goes on that perhaps other groups wouldn't even consider thinking that way.
This is legit. This is today's Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday. We're going to have this conversation tomorrow about where we're going to go to have fun and to make sure that we can get past the people who don't want us there to congregate with them. So how we deal with it is I deal with it head on, because I grew up in a household where we deal with these kind of situations head on. When I see you acting in a manner where I don't quite understand, I ask you directly, like, well, how come? Is it because you have too many black people here today? Or can I get in if I'm with him? I'll meet him. He's my new friend now. This is John. I'm Damon, and we're coming together. But they fight against it. They so it's not as much. It's not written on the wall anymore. It's not white only, black only anymore. It's mental. I'm guessing. So we're 50 years into it, but it's still mentally inbred that African Americans, black, it's not minorities. It's not the Indian men. It's not the Hispanic men. And it is actually the Hispanic men also, because we're getting more Hispanics into the community. But the Caucasian the segregation is still really real. When you go to a suburb, a neighborhood where the Kroger's is predominantly white, I don't like using the word white, but where it's predominantly white, service isn't as amazing. Like, I will have to come find you. Hey, please help me where I see it. But when you go to a neighborhood where the service is black, it's probably still bad. But but they acknowledge you. They speak. And so you see it, and I deal with it head on. But a lot of my friends, a lot of people in my generation, they build resentment towards it. So then the communication dialogue breaks down.
And you can't really blame them for that resentment. I mean,
no, I don't blame anybody, but I just wish the communication was I wish everybody could speak like I could speak, to say, hey, because then hopefully we would have some better dialogue.
Tyler?
Well, my dad used to take me out every summer during the 4th of July. We would go to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Had a nice little resort we would go to. And I never really understood why every time I came to the pool, they would grab their children, they would all leave. Me and my little brothers would go swim every time they would leave. It would just be us in the pool. And I never understood that. But as I got older, you start to come with TV and entertainment, how they put us out. It gives a certain fear. So they think that we're all like that, and we're not. Most people can't communicate the way that they really are. The way that we dress, the way that we do certain things. So there's always that certain line. And just as he was saying, the communication is not there. Someone can't just talk and say, well, I really don't act that way, or I don't, you know what I'm saying, portray myself that way. So it's still that struggle that we're trying to get past. Like, I'm in college. I'm trying to do something for myself. I'm stay productive. I'm always positive. I'm smile. I shake your hand, everything to anyone. It doesn't matter what your race is or how you look. I'm just friendly. But you won't get that off because of my color of skin, and we're still trying to get past that struggle.
Steve?
I will tell my son that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of a strong mind, and that even though you walk into a grocery store and every camera will be on you, and even though you might get pulled over for the police, and in this unjust society, just for the simple fact of you wearing a hoodie, you can be subject to death in 2013, that you cannot live your life in fear of that, and that you have to hold your head up high, no matter if you're wearing a hoodie or a business suit, walk right, and eventually, you know, we will be to a place, hopefully by sooner than 2019, but by that 400 years, we will be in a place where, as a people, we no longer have to worry about those things.
It was interesting. My younger son, one of his friends had his bar mitzvah, and so we went. This is probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and I enjoyed it. We were at Rockdale Temple out in Amberley Village, and we sat through the bar mitzvah, and it was almost like sitting through a Baptist service. It was long, stand up, sit down. But there was something that the little boy did as he took out the Torah and he unrolled the scroll, and as he read it in Hebrew, parts of the first 5 books of the Bible, and he kept saying this. He said it about 2 or 3 times. I'm going to be the best Jew I can be. I'm going to be the best Jew I can be. And I sat there with pride for him as I listened to him say that, because oftentimes as African Americans, we get challenged for saying something like that. I'm going to be the best black I can be, the best whatever. And we're going, well, why do you have to be black? Why is everything black? Aren't we just all Americans? And we're the only race that ever gets chastised. And then you have a younger generation, which is, I'm glad it's not here today represented, of young African Americans who would feel the same way. Well, Dad, why is everything black? Why was everything black? But as I watched this little Jewish boy, 12 or 13 years old, and he just kept saying, I'm going to be the best Jew I can be. And he didn't mean religiously. He didn't say I'm going to be the best Hebrew I can be. No, just as a Jewish person. And it was just a sense of pride that filled that room, that has to fill every room where African American students are and African American children are. And we have to say it unashamedly, because it shouldn't offend anyone else. It shouldn't hurt anyone else if I'm going to be the best black person I can be, the best African American I can be. So, you've got a great group here, and my son said it in the beginning. He had a father. He can touch me. And that's something that we have to, really work hard in our communities, is that there are more fathers and sons sitting here like this, that we raise our children to be the best man, woman, boy, girl, black, white, whatever it is, but just be your best.
Okay.
I'd like to say thank you, Reverend Lynch, and that's something that I think that somehow we need to be able to grasp. How do we be the best African American that I can be? And that's okay. And for it to be okay.
And the rest kind of will
take care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Our church bought some new property, and the property used to be property that was called the Jewish Community Center. Mm-hmm. The Jewish Community Center. And again, I grew up in a Jewish community, so I use them a lot as a reference. They had no compunction about putting Jewish Community Center, because they're like, that's our center. Trust me, in this city and almost any other city, if we just build this great big center and just say the African American Community Center, there would be a group of people in this city who would have a problem with that. They would just have a problem with that because, they still have this paternalistic attitude towards African Americans. African Americans have never been valued in this country unless we were working for somebody. We were brought here to work. So our value was only if we're working for someone. You could sell us, we had value. You can sell something as value if we're working for you. So we've got our work cut out, but we're getting there. And I don't want anybody who watches this to think that any of us sitting here have a sense of fear in our hearts. I think young Steve said it. There's no fear. We don't fear any other race of people. We're just continuing to strive.
And kind of moving into our last point about perception is reality, and it's a cliche. No doubt it's a cliche, but I feel like it's a recognized cliche in philosophy. And this might sound a bit superficial, but frankly, my parents always tell me, Kareem, when you go out, make sure you're clean shaven, make sure you wear a nice shirt, go out in the street, so you can put out this perception that you're clean cut, nice young man. How does that kind of factor into raising your son, or even on the receiving end as a son, listening to that?
I tell my children,
and particularly, sorry to interrupt you, in a business sense.
Well, I've had the experience, some very harsh experiences in just how I've been perceived, how I was dressed, and I think I was talking to Reverend Lynch prior to this, and I told him about I was coming out of St. Croix, and of course it was hot. I had on shorts and had on flip-flops like sandals and a t-shirt. And by the time I got to New Jersey, I was stopped as I was going through because they accused me of stealing my ticket. And I knew that it was only because I was just a black man coming through, and I don't know why the travel agent had put a sticker on top of the date or something like that, but I was held up and missed my plane, being accused of stealing my ticket. That I had my own ID, the ticket had my name on it. All right, so I don't travel without being dressed in a certain way. I could go in a first-class line just 2 months ago, again in blue jeans, coming off of a farm, doing some things out in the field, and then go in the first-class line, which you're called first to go, and then the guy says, "You're not first class." I'm a chairman at U.S. Air. I fly enough that I'm always first class. But because the way I was dressed and being black, he called me out and said, "You're not first class." And then when he looked at the ticket, he said, "Oh, you're a chairman." And let me go through. That's always happening all over this world. It doesn't stop. So perception.
Last Friday.
Yeah. So perception, okay, as to how you dress and where you go. If you want to be a businessman, I can't go with my, with my blue jeans, with my pants hanging on my butt, and then going to go into a corporation, Procter & Gamble or whomever, and say, "I want to do business with you." All right? Because their perception is how you are supposed to look. It's the game that you play. And the game that we play is commercial business, business to business. So I tell my son and my daughter, you dress like a business person. And again, my father, who is 81 years old, and it burns him up every time a white man sees him in his suit and say, "Where you preaching out today?" And he's never been a preacher. He's always been a businessman. And I don't have any problem correcting an individual and saying, "I'm a businessman. I'm not a preacher. And I'm as close to God as I could be in my day right now. But I'm not a preacher. I'm a businessman." And it's a perception that if you're dressed in a suit and you look like you're going someplace to do something, it can't be business.
Archie, I do want to loop in the young guys as well.
Okay.
But I know you were next after Archie. Go ahead, please.
I just want to add something very small to that. One of the things that I tell my children is, and my father said it to me, and I would assume that his father told him as growing up, is the worst thing that could ever happen to you in life is to be misunderstood, and only you determine who you are. Not me, but you. And so that's what I teach all of my children is, I don't determine who they are. I will set the standard and say, this is the expectation, but only you can determine who you are, and only you can tell the world who you are. I can say who you are, but only you can tell them who you are. And so the worst thing in the world is to be misunderstood. So you don't want to go through life saying, this is what I meant to say about me. No, this is who I am. Now you can say what you want about me, but I already know who I am. Therefore, you can never determine who I am. And so one of the things that I have, Steve and I, we actually come from the same county, Butler County, so we've had a lot of interacting on the political end. But one of the things that I respect about him is that he's always the same guy, always. I've never seen him duck out, duck tail, whatever you want to call it. He's always been a man in my presence, and he always been a man of character. And everybody in that audience has always respected him in the same light. And I respect that about you as a man. But the other thing is, I don't have to ask somebody who Steve is. Steve has already presented himself as to who he is. And I hope in the same audience he's seen that from me, because that's who I present. I'm Archie Johnson. And even in Hamilton City Council, I'm the first elected African-American male in 50 years. And so going into those executive sessions, going into those hours of trying to project who I am, I never asked my colleagues for any kind of permission to project or inject myself in a conversation and say, this is who I am, this is what my constituents want, and this is what my expectancy is. They don't always respond, but one thing for sure is they're never confused when they walk away. And that's the same thing I tell my children. You are who you are, and you have the responsibility to tell the world, this is who I am. Accept me or reject me, but this is who I am.
With that,
We're gonna Damon, and we'll come right back to you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Perception is I don't know what words to use, but young Trayvon Martin was killed because of a perception. No matter what I wear, I'll have that perception. I could have a suit and tie on, and there will still be a perception of, it's not unequal, but less than, wherever I step in. So personally, when you say perception, I didn't know if you were speaking on the way I dress. Because in 2013, we're moving towards the hip-hop community runs the culture. So the way we dress will change. The suit and tie businessman, they won't be here long. I'm 29 years old. By the time I'm 40, suit and tie businessman, they won't be running the country when I'm 50. It will be jeans. It will be more relaxed. But the perception is it's not clothing. It's not clothing. It goes along the lines of communication. I'm going to have to, wherever I walk into or however I'm dressed, because I'm African-American male, I'm going to have to explain myself. I'm going to have to say why I'm here and what I'm about. Regardless, no matter how I'm dressed, you have to explain yourself as an African-American everywhere you go. You can't let what you wear be your perception anywhere you go, because it'll always be less than. Even if you're at the top level or you're dressed to the T, you'll always come in less than because of your skin color. So you have to explain yourself. And that, to me, that has to be taught. Like, go explain yourself. Go explain that you're the best for this position. Go explain that you're not here to by any harm, but that you're here to compete and that you're here to do good. So perception is, I don't like people saying like, oh, you got to wear this, oh, you got to wear that. Because I grew up in New Prospect Baptist Church where it's come as you are. If you can come as you are to church, I can come as I am to anywhere I want. However I feel like rolling out of bed, that's how I'm coming. But hopefully I'll explain myself to let you know that I'm here to help. I'm here to encourage. I'm here to make things better.
Can I add just before, because I want to give this to him, but he made an excellent point that I think that our youth need to have in a different perspective.
Breaker blue.
That point right there. Okay. Are we on?
We're good to go. We're still rolling.
Okay.
Man.
All right.
Just the light.
Is this? You are who you are, regardless. But when you walk on a football field, you cannot be wearing a baseball uniform. And when you walk on a baseball field, you can't wear a basketball uniform. So when you go into the boardroom and you go into corporate America, and if that's who you're doing business with, there has to be some familiarity. You've got to be appropriate to the game that you're playing. And under any circumstances, it's a game that you play. And yes, there's church and there's churches, there's business to business, and there's B2C, business consumers. And they're all different games and different levels that you play. If you want to play at a certain level, it does make a difference as to how you're dressed and how you present yourself. And for the youth that's coming through, that's very comfortable with how they dress and how they do, and the people that they engage with, they're very comfortable with that, and they have good familiarity to it. You do also need to know that depending on the game that you play, there's also a uniform that goes along with it.
And there may also, I'm sorry.
I just want to get Tyler in here. Please, Tyler.
On the comment you just said, that's true. You have to dress for the occasion all the time because you need that image. Because how am I going to think that if I come to a interview and I'm dressed in jeans and this is a business interview, what kind of man does that make me? Without understanding a person, you judge them on their image. It's just that's what everyone does. I do it, anyone does it.
I value what you're saying in terms of, and that's regardless of race or ethnicity. You go to a business interview, dress cleanly because it's a business interview. But really what I'm trying to get at is, everyday things, everyday type of things, grocery store, walking around, these kinds of things, because those are kinds of the things that you're going to be faced with more often.
Yeah. Right. And
so, Tyler, if you could kind of speak to that, I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Okay.
That's kind of what
on an everyday thing, as my dad always said, I am who I am, and I'm not going to change that for anyone. I want to be myself, and first when I wake up, that's what I think. But when it comes to dressing, I'm always going to try to put myself in something that I feel like campaigns myself or shows myself as a positive image. I don't want to come with my pants too low. I want to have it at my waist, That's just how I was taught. My dad, we used to campaign for his election. When I go to the church, because he's a pastor, I have to look a certain way. It's just always been that way through my whole life. I always want to make sure I come in a positive aspect.
Understand there's a history to this. There's a beautiful history to this. Black people have always felt that if I dress up, then I'll be more accepted. And so Bubba can be over here in Bubba's white guy overalls and spitting tobacco, and my great granddaddy can be walking through in his suit, and it's not Sunday. But he just feels good, and he feels like he's going to get more respect. And yet to Bubba, he's still a boy, and Bubba's still the white man, and my great granddaddy is still second class to Bubba. So what black people have always done is we've always tried to. Black people will dress up to go shopping. All right, because we feel everyday things. We will dress up to go shopping because we feel we get more respect from the person behind the counter than if we're just dressed in jeans or something. And we have done that from day one. Now you have a generation coming up now. I guess my son is articulating that they don't do the same thing. But there is a history to why black people dress as well as we can, when we can, and it's not always just to do business, it's just to be respected. You know, so we don't have the things that happen when you're at the airport, and it's to be respected. Now, is it fair? Probably not, but it's a reality. You know, and there's other ways to dress. You know, there are times when I dress counterculture because I'm trying to do something counterculturally. When I grew my hair long and had locks, there was a reason behind that. I mean, that's not the normal attire, the normal length of hair to go into a bank and be a banker. I wasn't trying to be a banker. I was trying to be a revolutionary. I was trying to change society. And as a pastor, you know, the way I'm dressed now, my church members, if they see me today, they're like, wow, Reverend, you dressed up. Because I don't dress up on Sundays to preach. Because historically in the black church, you have these preachers who get up and they preach in these shiny suits and their pink suits and pink shoes to match. And people are just like, I don't want that. I want you to hear what I'm saying. Because what I'm saying is more important than what I'm wearing. Also, there's this sense, it's not just dress, though, it's presence. And every man up here knows when you have presence, when you walk into a room, you control the room. I don't care who's in there, white, black, red, or yellow. And that's what we need to begin to teach to our youth. We're beginning to teach our young people in our church how to public speaking. You know, it's not cute that you can't stand up and give a sound, solid public speech. You know, we just pat you on your back when you can't speak English. So there's a history to it. We've dressed up because it just makes us feel better, and we'll think we get more respect.
I'm a strong believer in perception is reality, but also you become who you hang out with and who you associate with. And if you want to be the best, hang out with the best. Be with people who are challenging you to go to the next level. You know, this is black, white, or Hispanic. If you're in school and you're hanging out with the crowd that's not doing, you know, the right things, you're eventually going to wind up not doing the right thing. You need to go to the people who are challenging you to do your best, to rise to the next level, because that is what ultimately feeds you and will lift you up and to be able to overcome these perceptions.
Remember, perception is reality, but it's someone else's reality. Their perception of you is their reality. It doesn't have to be your reality, but it's just their reality.
Well, very good, gentlemen. I'm out of talking points. At this point, I want to thank you all for coming in, and I appreciate the insight and the candid nature of our conversation. So I appreciate it, and thanks again.